Welcome to Juxtaposition, the first of 15 talks that will be happening here each Monday at 6 o'clock for the course of the semester as part of the Studium Generale here at the University of Arts. And this is an initiative that I started as guest professor here at the school. So juxtaposition, what does that mean? Juxtaposition basically describes the act or the instant of putting or placing two things next to each other to compare or to contrast that maybe don't really fit to one another. And that's also exactly the aim of what I'm trying to achieve here. With this lecture series, it's going to be hybrid, so there's going to be talks here, present and live, and there's also many that are joining us remotely from all over the world. But the series aims at a very broad kind of audience, not only you, the students of the UDK, but also other students and actually even the general public, everyone who's interested in learning from like different writers, architects, designers, artists, how they work and what they are inspired by and how they kind of approach their practice. It is also one of two, let's say, pedagogical experiments we're piloting here as part of my guest professorship. One is this lecture series, the other one is a master colloquium that I will be speaking about later. So as the curator and moderator and host of the series, it is also my duty to break the ice today. So I will introduce you to myself and my work. And I will do this. I have 55 slides with me, so it's going to be about an hour. It's going to be fast-paced. I'm going to be speaking quickly because I'm trying to run through a lot of projects. And as you will see throughout my talk, let's say a rather deliberate eclecticism or a refusal of coherence and an ongoing flight from somewhat limiting binary systems quite accurately describes my professional attempts throughout my career over the last 2 decades. I work as a curator, as an artist, as a writer, and as an educator, and I'm interested in diverse formats of, I call it knowledge dissemination or knowledge communication, whether it's through teaching or whether it's through exhibitions or through books and publications, through symposiums, films, or any other event. And I find myself somewhat at the intersection of art, design, and architecture in both theory and in practice. So I see myself rather as a mediator, actually, or a translator in the cultural realm. And my aim is very much to find connective meanings and also to show multiple readings, whatever the topic may be. But I am not an artist and I don't come from an artistic background. I actually twice wanted to apply to the UDK in my early years and never did. Actually, I turned around with my mappe under my arm on the way here and I decided to study Comparative Religious Studies, philosophy and ethnology here in Berlin at the FU and in Rome at La Sapienza. So my particular interest has there been the interrelation between very abstract ideas and thoughts and their sometimes concrete manifestations and realizations. Or furthermore, I became interested in exploring different, even diverging systems of knowledge and of understanding. So over the years, in this kind of practice of mine, I developed some kind of a pattern, or call it DNA or philosophy, or even a methodology that I will quickly share with you because it helps you understand how I work and how these kind of projects are to be understood. The first one is creative theory. What I mean with that is a somewhat applied notion of theory. So the original meaning of creative comes from the Latin creare, which means to make grow, or to bring forth, to produce. And theory comes from the Greek theoria, literally understood means to look at or to consider or to speculate. So creative theory hence means to make something out of a speculation, out of a contemplation. Or understand theory as a seed or inspiration for a creative production. And the example here that we see is actually one of my favorite theoreticians, that Marshall McLuhan, kind of the patron saint of media theory, and how his ideas were then translated by David Cronenberg, who actually studied comparative literature under McLuhan in Toronto and made these kind of, I don't know if you're familiar with the work, but B-movie, body horror, splatter stuff, but it's basically McLuhan's theory. And then again, Robert Dee, another contemporary artist, translates this into kind of making a sculpture out of the first edition of McLuhan's famous The Medium is the Message. Secondly, the critical cut-up. So to continue our etymological excursion with critical cut-up, critical comes from kritikos, that's Greek, and it describes the ability to make judgments or to separate and somewhat decide. And cut-up, like the old Dadaist, Surrealist, Burroughs literary technique, means creating a new text from already existing diverging other texts. So it's really about intertextuality and intersectionality here. The backdrop for you guys is that I believe that cut-up or collage or appropriation, or call it mimicry or quotation or illusion, is the sine qua non of the creative act per se. So cutting across actually all forms and genres in the realm of cultural production. Yet be kind of critically aware of it, kind of know where things come from and where you take them to. And last but not least, artistic co-production. Sounds a bit cheesy, but I mean it. So stripped of all fanciness, the term artistic or art literally means, or originally meant, a practical skill. Like art is a craft, like a business. So I understand that really as a professionalism. If you're an artist and you've really done your work, you are professional in what you do. And you're dedicating yourself to whatever it is that you're doing. And co-production, co as kind of the living prefix, means together or mutually in common. And production comes from pro, in front of, and ducere, to bring, so to bring forth. So to make something happen together, basically. And simply said, nothing happens in isolation, in particular in the realm of cultural production. There's nothing that you do by yourself. No? The famous saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Again, a bit cheesy, but it's really true. You need to collaborate, you need to work with others and to come further. But this notion of kind of hybridity in thought and form has been around for me from the get-go. I found this image a couple of years ago. What you're looking at is an original cadaver exquis from when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. You know, that old surrealist parlor game where, one draws the head, then you fold it, and it's the body, then you fold, and the legs, and the foot, and then someone gives it a title. And what you see here is some kind of a weird mixture between a pirate and an Easter bunny and a clown, and it says Lukas when he's thinking. And this hybridity is kind of running through as the red thread through my entire practice. I am thereby very kind of influenced by this quote by Jim Jarmusch, famous filmmaker, or let's say I found some truth in this one, as I believe that these ideals of originality and uniqueness that have long dominated conceptions of art, I don't buy it, simply said, yeah? So since antiquity, philosophers and theorists have viewed a successful work of art as a complete and a perfect whole. And it's, again, something that I don't really buy. So there's somewhat romantic ideologies of the pure artistic novelty, originality, that reinforce the perception, understanding of an artwork as a complete end in itself with inviolable integrity. And again, I don't believe it. It's a beautiful piece by Julian Roosevelt where he took, I think, 30 videos with Kate Blanchett, in which he translated artistic manifestos of the last 100, 200 years into these short movies. And this one is showing now Kate Blanchett reciting actually Jim Jarmusch, and then there's more coming afterwards, but they're quite beautiful. I saw them many years ago at the Hamburger Bahnhof. Yeah, why the brain? I think though we still tend to think of ourselves also as coherent beings and believe that our awareness is a continuous and mental state, we are actually constantly evolving. We shift from one perception to the next, from actuality to dream, and from association to deduction, and recollection to imagination. So I think that human consciousness is an ever-changing cut-up of mental fragments held together by, let's say, a very fluctuating sense of self that we have. And recent neurological studies show that memory, imagination, and consciousness are themselves actually stitched, they're collaged, they're quilted and pastiched together. So much about where I'm coming from, how I kind of approach the cultural realm as a curator, mediator, or translator. And time is ticking. I will give you now a quick overview of what to expect next. I will cover the following 5 topics or fields of engagement of my professional practice with 5 projects each. I'm going to be very short, fast, and quick. And after this, we will go into the more kind of logistical questions regarding the seminar, what you have to do for this, how to really register for that, but that kind of comes towards the end. So let's start with inspirations, because it's usually the most interesting thing you can learn about someone. I tend to do this also in classes, that we kind of show each other what we work on, but then the next session we show each other what we are inspired by, and that tells actually much more. No? What artists are you inspired by? What films are you watching? What music are you listening to? What books are you reading? So it's 5, and it could be 50, it could be 500, but let's start with these. And let's start with Walter Benjamin. So Walter Benjamin, famous German literary critic, philosopher, essayist, famous for his Passagenwerk, or Kate's project, which is an unfinished project composed of fragments. And this is the key term here, fragments, that included quotes that he had collected, as well as his own writings on different topics. And the quote here reads, "The amorphous fragment produces a multiplicity of meanings rather than a singularity of organic totality." There's again a questioning of this idea of totality or wholeness of things. And according to Benjamin, this amorphous fragment, as he calls it, or amorphous fragment juxtaposition even, produces a multiplicity of meanings, and here it becomes interesting, interrupts always the context in which it is inserted. So these fragments, they kind of float almost by themselves, and wherever they enter, they interrupt and disrupt. And this is what gets interesting for me. So as I said before, I'm highly suspicious of anything that speaks of totality, wholeness, or completeness. It's a big red flag, as this usually leads quickly to some form of essentialism, a notion of pureness, and that's just a stone's throw away from fascist ideologies. Next one for me is Donna Haraway. She's a prominent scholar in the field of feminist and postmodern science and technology studies that you may be familiar with. A lot of ideas to kind of relate to here, but let's say there's a beautiful book that she wrote called Staying with the Trouble, and what that simply means is like, put your finger where it hurts, stay with the trouble, push where it starts hurting, and this is actually also one of the tasks that you, as becoming artists, architects, designers, can really use as your own claim, and show up, like be present, show up, be everywhere, and understand that kind of complexity is the name of the game. And the other thing that I have learned from Haraway, that she constantly reminds us, to be one, you must be many. So again, this questioning of unity or wholeness, because I think we will need to recognize our status actually more, and that's a term again of Haraway, as assemblies, from the microbiological gut brain to kind of the human dependence on the hospitality of our shared planet. Which brings me to Jamaican-born British Marxist sociologist and cultural theorist Stuart Hall, who deals in his work with questions of culture, again of identity, and of representation. So he developed this theory of encoding and decoding in hegemonic frameworks of power or institutions, politics, economy, and media, really looking at media and representation. And he sees this, the quote here, identity as a production which is never complete and always in process. And he has also, in his kind of questioning of identity, this beautiful example of the English tea as the symbol of English identity, yet nothing really comes from England. The tea comes from Ceylon or Sri Lanka or India, the sugar comes from the Caribbean. And so there's this beautiful long quote by him that starts with, I am the sugar at the bottom of the English cup of tea. So it's also, in his case, about understanding there's no history without that other history. So always understanding that there's one history, but there's many, many more. And this kind of multiplicity is key. Which brings me, in continuation of our kind of identity questioning here, to Judith or Jack Halberstam, a gender and queer theorist and writer, whose methodological approach, the scavenger methodology, has been a huge influence for my own work. So in a way, in a continuation of her way in Hall's critical questioning of identity, queer theory also describes fixed attributes of the self, let's say such as sexuality or gender, as variables, in response to particular historical, political, and social constructs. So there is something about doing something that moves against what seems evident in actually all queer theory and pedagogies. And the scavenger methodology, to kind of quickly read this to you, queer methodology is a scavenger methodology. Scavenger are basically animals that hunt for dead animals, no? That uses different methods to collect and produce information. It combines methods that are often cast at being at odds, so don't really work together with each other, and it refuses the academic compulsion towards disciplinary coherence. So the connection, I think, is obvious by now. And then again, this being said as a middle-aged, able, cis, white male, but it's still it's at the core of really my kind of own working method. And last but not least, Edouard Glissant, French-speaking writer, essayist, and philosopher from Martinique originally, that looked at the contemporary reality of, as he called, colliding cultures as one of, again, accelerating multiplicity. So the only universality today is one of relations, and that's the big term for Glissant, or relations, or the poetics of relations, based upon diversity rather than unity. So in a way, going full circle to Benjamin, how I started my inspiration, or Benjamin's notion of the fragment I mentioned earlier, Glissant incants the state of the relation also as an amorphous category. As you remember, Benjamin spoke of the amorphous fragment that interrupts the context in which you insert it. And also similar to Benjamin, Glissant's writing is fragmentary. It's filled with interjections, repetitions, and other tactical devices designed to delay or suspend the unilarity of his argument. So these are, let's say, 5, and there could be many, many more kind of inspirations for me in the way I start a project. Again, I didn't dive into Montaigne or Orby Warburg or Claude Lévi-Strauss, Marsh McLuhan, Judith Butler. There's many, many more, but I had only 5. Anyhow, let's take a look at some of the work I've done now. And let's start with the editorial. So with books, I have done a lot of books. I love books. That's also how it all started for me, and I'm a confessing bibliophile. I have, over the years, published, authored, and edited approximately 30 books at the intersection of art, design, and architecture. This one, Space is the Place, is a book that came out last year that looks at contemporary artistic practices that turn spaces into places. So space and place are here explored as topics and mediums of a, say, very playful investigation and serious reflection. Another book from 2016 is Planetary Echoes, and that brings us into this realm of space, like literally out of space exploration. That's also a big thing for me. So this one focused on the imagination of life on other planets in the arts, in literature, in the science at the beginning of the 21st century. And it attempts to somewhat integrate this discourse also into the very fabric of society today and connect artistic research and the abstract theoretical sciences on an international level, with contributions by Buzz Aldrin, one of the Apollo 11 astronauts, or Richard Branson as the entrepreneur who tries to go into space, and so forth and so on. And it obviously pays homage to my obsession with space. In the same line, I did another book called Memories of the Moon Age, which is basically, it traces mankind's dream of flying to the moon. So really from the beginning to the end, since when did we start dreaming of going to the moon? No? It's a visual cultural history of this kind of imaginary lunar exploration in snapshots from the past, present, and the future. And it's also a super powerful metaphor for imagination or even the arts. So if you think about that, the rocket scientists who eventually built the rockets that took us to the moon, they were all inspired by Jules Verne as kids. So they all kind of got this imagination, the seed dropped in their heads as a little kid, and they made it reality. And it's typical how fiction becomes then science, and then just it's the power of imagination that lies in this idea of flying to the moon. First you see it. It's actually, I think, the second thing. Kids first recognize the sun and then the moon. And then you eventually start dreaming, but you make it happen and you actually go there. An old publication of mine from 2010 already, self-published, was Ladi Dadi, the Eclectic Manifesto. And this is an artist manifesto that actually declares nothing utterly new and expresses no final truths whatsoever. And proclaims also no deeper understanding of any kind, and actually completely lacks any consistency of thought. But it's also, it reads as a manifesto as well as an encyclopedic compendium holding a very personal summary of inspirations from popular music. So it's actually music titles. The idea was that I realized, okay, we ran out of manifestos. There's nothing more really to say, but somehow pop culture does have a strong importance in our life and value. So sometimes actually just titles or quotes from pop music songs that trigger something, that really stand for something. So this goes only, I don't know, from Strawberry Fields to Forever to Big Daddy Kane. So it's very, very broad. And last but not least, this is my most recent publication. It's quite a large one. It's an eclectic meta manual called The Shelter Cookbook, which explores actually the content of underground publications of the self-build movement, like DIY movement from the 1970s, and like the Whole Earth catalog or Shelter and the Dome Book, and relates their ways of thinking and working to contemporary practices. This is a publication that I did together with Leopold Bancini as part of our contribution to the current Biennale in Venice, which I'll show you later again. But again, this is just a quick tour de force to projects, and there's many more, but it gives you an idea of the broad range of topics that I'm interested in, that I'm covering. So let's come to the curatorial, because I started with making books, which then eventually led me to being invited actually to curate exhibitions, literally. Someone said, it's a nice book, don't you want to do an exhibition? Usually it's the other way around. You get invited to do an exhibition, eventually make a book out of it. For me, it was vice versa. So let's continue with that. The biggest so far has been Living the City, an exhibition that I co-curated with Tatjana Schneider and the Green Isle for the Federal Ministry of Building here in Berlin at the former airport of Tempelhof, that told over 50 stories from architecture and art and city planning and civil society and politics about cities in Europe and beyond, about like active participation and a very proactive approach to being a citizen. In a large, like spatial collage, basically, that we created there. You can see also the visual identity done by Lammenkirch, that we played with this idea of like overlapping, contradictory and connections. And the collage again, and inside the main hall was quite a labyrinth of projects and spaces. But the collage, the fragmentary part, is at the key of this idea. And connected to the book that I showed first, Space is the Place, the book came after the exhibitions. For 1 year, I curated in Munich at the BNKR an exhibition series called Space is the Place, again about artists that work in space, that explore space. And this ended up in 2 group shows, a solo show, 4 talks, a performance, and a symposium actually in Venice during the last Art Biennale. And it was with artists like Bruce Nauman, Andrea Fraser, Tom Sachs, Alicia Quade, Michael Salzdorfer, Olafur Eliasson, Julius von Bismarck, Beatrice Colomina, and many, many more. So again, the beauty here was that I had the chance to dive into the topic not only with one exhibition, but actually a whole year and 4 exhibitions to really start with the thresholds. Actually, the first exhibition was about walls and how to overcome walls. And the last one was called Intergalactic and was about outer space as a projection field for the imagination of artists and designers. And now back to an exhibition from 2010 or 11 it was here in Berlin, May, called Scratch and Cut. So you start to see the red thread. And this was an exhibition that was devoted to the artistic process of remixing.
Okay, let's take it from here.
1, 2, 3, 4. With the most venomous man, be the godfather of the club banger. Let me hear you clap. You get applause from the very beginning. You can give me a standing ovation while I bang your face in. With another bang and I call it a cliffhanger. Watch me mingle and strangle this whole rap shit. Come on. You can see the way I make a max sequence down bottom. The way I got him, give me my cash quick. Come on. Put it away, put it away, put it away now. Put it away, put it away.
Yeah, so this was the kind of the trailer for it, and what we created here is an exhibition that was inspired by Lee Scratch Perry, which you see to the right. I don't know if that name rings a bell for you guys. He recently passed away, but it's one of the genius of music, a music producer who in the 1970s already deconstructed recorded music using actually astonishingly simple or primitive, like pre-digital hardware, creating what he called versions, which was then the kind of the birth of dub music, which laid the foundations of contemporary electronic music culture. So for me, he's been an inspiration to me since I was like 17 or 16, and here I had the chance to invite him and invite other artists to basically tell them, can we somewhat recreate, you see his head and his clothes, can we make this into a space? And we did, and we also said that it's not going to be an exhibition that you just a white cube walk into, but a carnivalesque space, a performance where people engage, where you can touch everything, where you actually you can't avoid the art. It's literally touching you, which brings me again to another kind of theorist I could have mentioned before. There's a Russian literary critic, Mikhail Bakhtin, and he worked on the idea of the carnivalesque. And the carnivalesque, as in carnival, kind of subverts and inverts and liberates the assumptions of the dominant style or atmosphere through humor and through chaos. So carnival travesties. It crowns and it uncrowns, it inverts ranks, it exchanges roles, like the beggar becomes the king and the king becomes the beggar. And it makes sense from nonsense and nonsense of sense. And this is something that I've been exploring for quite a while, but came to a full culmination in this project now almost 12 years ago. Or this 3-day festival I curated for 2 years in a row in Rotterdam as part of the opening of the cultural season in the Netherlands. It's 3 days in the Witte de Wit Street. I don't know if you're familiar with Rotterdam, but it's kind of the street where all the museums and the important galleries are at. And it draws roughly 20 to 30,000 visitors over one weekend. And under the title Victory of the Bottom-Up Approach in 2011 and The Street, the Life issue in 2012, I curated numerous artistic interventions in public space, ranging from temporary architectures to sculptures and performances with the likes of Bill Drummond from the KLF. If you don't know it, Google, it's fantastic. Exists, or even Raumlabor Berlin, Markus Bader being one of the professors here in architecture at the school. And from these big projects to also very small ones, together with my friend Arun Markus, I ran a very, very small off space in Berlin, in Kreuzberg at the Aufbauhaus, called Studiolo Berlin, which we called a curatorial space for contemporary creativity, where we had a lot of small solo shows or from photographers and artists, various events, and also used it as a location. It doesn't exist anymore. I'm just trying to show you the scalability of the projects, from like large federal ministry kind of finance buildings projects to actually very small off spaces, and that's also where I draw my inspiration from. Which brings me to artistic. What I here refer to are projects I was invited to not as a curator, but rather as a participating artist of sorts. Again, even though I'm not classically trained as an artist. And the lines, are quite blurry here and everywhere in my vita, as you, I think, are coming to understand. So I'm showing you a really old, literal collage, which I actually did collage. It's not something that I'm interested in, but I did it. This is called Traveling at the Speed of Thought. And this was actually an homage to Joseph Kossou, the American conceptual artist, and his piece 1 and 3 Chairs, which is kind of a visual expression of Plato's concept of time, but that's too much for now. In any case, so you see these kind of record covers, and in the middle you see another homage that's an LP from the Ultramagnetic MCs. The album's called Critical Beatdown, and it's from 1988. And in this album introduced a variety of new and innovative sampling techniques at the time. So it's among the first to use chopped samples and that are rearranged and edited to kind of also change the context. So from this to actually also commercial work that I've done over the years. For many years I did the visual campaign for the Red Bull Music Academy here with my longtime collaborator Floyd Schulz and Max Zehan, a photographer. We created these kind of still lifes. One was for a conversation with Jan Delay, which you can see. There's all these little elements, mode selector and Wolfgang Voigt. They were in Hamburg, Berlin, and Cologne. Or this project called Tattoos for Architects, which really started because I had nothing to do, and I had an intern, Javier Rodriguez at the time, who just started tattooing. So we said, okay, why don't we do a tattoo flash for architects? Just as a joke, really dirty Russian prisoner style tattoo kind of drawings, but with puns to architectural history and theory. It somehow went very viral and led to us being invited by the Goethe Institute to the 2018 Architecture Biennale. So we went to Venice, actually with a massage bench, which you can shoulder like this. And we had pop-up tattoo stations right next to the German pavilion, at the Hong Kong pavilion, and 3 other locations during the opening days, and tattooed maybe 20 people during the opening days. So really rough and gritty and dirty, but it was a beautiful antithesis to the Biennale crowd. And Biennale is fun, but Architecture Biennale is a bit more stiff. So like a tattoo bench there really kind of broke with norms of what to accept there. But apart from it being really fun, it also turned to one of the most prominent pairs of analogy in Western history, namely that of architecture / the city and the human body. So since antiquity, philosophers and architects alike have imagined cities and buildings as human bodies. So the comparison of a tattoo and an ornament thereby reveals another layer of meaning here. No? And even following the famed German architect and architecture historian Gottfried Semper from the 18th century, like the Semper Oper in Dresden, he saw architecture as our third skin. So clothes being the first, skin being the first, then clothes being the second, and architecture the third skin. And Semper even ascribes the origin of traditional ornament in buildings to the art of tattooing. So what has been first tested on the body, so he argues, has been then transformed or transferred to the building. So it even made a fantastic sense within the architectural biennial. Sometimes the concept comes first and then comes the project, or sometimes you just start something and then you realize actually there is more to it. You can somehow make it work. This is really briefly, this was in Shenzhen, at the Shenzhen Biennale. I did a piece together with Thomas Tsang that dedicated itself to the surplus, or the cognitive surplus of the metaphor of the war. So it was basically a bit dark, a very large wall piece, almost like a Donald Judd piece, like a monolithic piece, but it could actually open up and had many ways to walk through and pass through, and it was also a blackboard. And then the last one here, being our current installation at the Venice Biennale in the Arsenale, still open for a couple more days. So this Biennale, curated by Hashim Sarkis, has the title, How Will We Live Together? That was kind of the curatorial question. And my friend and colleague Leopold Banchini, as an architect, was invited to show an existing work of his. And he said, well, this is kind of boring. You can go to my website. And asked me, or approached me and said, shall we do something together? So we did. And both decided we're not going to do it about us, we're going to do it about someone else and use this platform as an homage. And we did it actually about Lloyd Kahn, an 86-year-old builder and publisher. The New York Times recently called him the king of DIY building. And made this very fine installation and modest installation about his publications, the architecture that he promotes in his books and his own work. And here is another important fact for me, is this kind of cross-generational dialogue. I love to work cross-generationally. There's so much to learn when approaching the kind of the different generations, not just staying in your own bubble of same age people. So as a quick run through the artistic stuff. And now to the educational. Actually, I'm still running good in the time here. Of all the stuff, I have to admit that my biggest passion or calling really, hands down, is education. That's where I really strive and what I truly love. But not as a mono-directional endeavor, but as a also constantly evolving practice of co-learning, really, of team working and somewhat productive sharing of experience and knowledge on a kind of flat hierarchy. Again, with institutional systems like the university, there's always a hierarchy in these things, and you cannot, someone can't get rid of them, but I really do see myself in this more as a coach than anything else. There's a lot of people that have good ideas, and my job really is, how can I help make this better? How can I make it shine even more? So I've taught and lectured actually for architects and for designers and for artists in numerous universities and schools around the world, from MIT and Harvard to ETH and Angewandte to the Academy of Fine Arts in Nuremberg to the University of Arts in Linz. I was also here 10 years ago at the Architects, so kind of I've been around, I've seen the scene of teaching. It's also interesting to have worked in these kind of different disciplines. Again, myself coming originally from theory and philosophy. So in the following, however, I will only focus on one exemplary pedagogical experiment of mine called Radical Cut-Up. So Radical Cut-Up was a master program that I conceived and directed at the Sandberg Instituut in Amsterdam as a temporary master. So the Sandberg has this ingenious system of offering, classical fine arts, design, etc. But each year they're temporary masters. They only last for 2 years. They never existed before. They will never exist afterwards. And the director, you're being approached as one, has more or less carte blanche. So I had a yearly budget, and the rest was really up to me what to do with it. So this master I dedicated to the idea of the cut-up or the collage, as I see it as a very important mode of creativity today, and maybe one of the most dominant modes of cultural production. Again, we're not creating out of nothing, but we are always inserted in numerous meanings and contexts, and we're really using them as the raw material to create new outlines, new narratives, and like newly synthesized entities. And kind of really was served as an open container, the word for it. And it was, I was there, again, influenced by a lot of people. One of them at the forefront, obviously, Nicolas Bourriot, a French art critic who wrote this amazing piece called Post-Production, in which he argues that it's no longer a matter of starting kind of with a blank slate, a carte blanche, or creating meaning on the basis of some mystical virgin material, but of finding means of insertion into the innumerable flows of production. So in any case, 5 points. People, what you see up there is actually the 15 master students that did the course and then graduated with me, and around it is some of the teachers and tutors involved, from Gloria Wecker to Nancy Juve, Amal Al-Haq, Louis Barry-Snegon, Shumon Bazar, Femke Decker, Emeka Okereke, Faina de Jong, Michael van Iersel, Charlie Kohlers, Ahmed Ögüt, Amy Dickett, many, many more. So it's key to really choose who is in the team, like who are the students that are participating, but also who are the people that engage with them, and always in this, direct approach. And the next, now I'm jumping. One is place. So people, very important. Who are you working with? And then place. What you see here is our space. So we had our own room, atelier, as we call it here, for Radical Cut-Up. And the first thing that we did, it was an empty space, is create the infrastructure, somewhat the curatorial infrastructure for it, and build it together with the students, also with another department together. Next thing is, from the beginning, I was very intent to working with all the other departments, with all the other faculties, with all the other teachers, and invite them to everything that we did. I even had one student who did her master with me, but she did only courses in the other programs, and kind of served almost as the ambassador of Radical Cut-Up, meaning, okay, then go wherever, strive around, scavenger methodology, as we remember earlier, Jack Judith Halberstam. So that's what we did there, and these were students that came from art, graphic design, product and industrial design, sculpture, photography, philosophy, journalism, fashion, music, very, very broad. Youngest was at the time 21, the oldest was 41, from all over the world. And all of the lectures that we had were public. Students did many workshops with artists and designers that invited, but they also came into the position of teaching themselves. So they had to teach workshops to bachelor students to kind of really understand how does that work from both sides of the game. And they were introduced to all of the workshops of the school. So they had a week of introduction to the metal workshop, to the glass blowing workshop, to the wood workshop, to the 3D printing, to photo, textile, etc., etc. And it was really about pushing them all to leave their comfort zones and discover something kind of new, or kind of apply their what they have learned so far to new materials. And thirdly, program. So people, place, and program. It's like with a computer. It's great if you have good hardware, but if you don't have the software, it doesn't do anything really. So we hosted numerous events, exhibitions, and workshops that were both kind of curated by myself, but also by the students. So they had the chance to invite people that they wanted to see. So not something that I proposed, but each first Monday they invited someone on their own. And this was happening at the Sandberg Instituut, it was happening at the Rietveld, and it was happening at the Stedelijk Museum. It's another connection that I made from the beginning, that all our lectures also were held in the Stedelijk Museum. We did actually a huge symposium there called Disruptive Narratives, which was the beginning of their master's year when they started writing the master thesis that had, we called it a muscle and mind week. There were performances in the morning. So we worked with choreographers, really stuff that's totally out of my comfort zone. So all kinds of movements in the group. And then in the afternoon were actually really like deep dive theoretical lectures. But to understand that you kind of need both, have a holistic approach to it. And the key aspect for everything was for the preparation for life after Sandberg, for life after the art school. Because this is beautiful here. It's a wonderful bubble that you're in. Looks a bit different outside. And it's, I think, one of the things that is generally very, very overlooked in education, to get students actually ready for the world out there. And another medium we used were exhibitions. We did 2 big exhibitions, many small ones, but 2 big exhibitions after each year, in continuation of this kind of idea of preparation for the life outside of the ivory tower of the art school. And I follow this principle that I call reality bites. So reality does bite. You have to go out there, you have to test your ideas, your work, and your practice in real life. You have to invite the feedback. You have to show up, as Haraway says, and you might as well have to get burned. You have to ask questions and learn from it. But there was an important medium for them to also take themselves really serious as professionals, as artists, and publications. Obviously, I'm a book nerd. I love to make publications about everything that I do. I hope to make a publication out of this juxtaposition lecture series, so let's talk next year. But it's just another means of investigation for me. Here we did one publication where the students became the editors, or we became the guest editors of the Lowdown magazine. That's a pop culture magazine that's been around for 2 decades, and we took it over and filled the content. The students showed their own work, but they also had the chance to reach out to artists that they were inspired by and did interviews with them, for example. Then the second is Book the Stick, like a telephone book, and these are all the master theses of the students, but just copied, old school, a Xerox book basically of master copies, 700 pages thick. And the last one came after the course with Sandberg Press. This was the reader that I basically gave the students from the beginning without ever having it before. So these are all the thinkers that influenced me to start this program, all their key texts and essays in one book. And despite this being a very analog medium, Radical Cut-Up really was inspired by also the impact and influence that the kind of ubiquitous digital technologies have on the way we produce art, or generally always questions how media influence the way how we think and react to the world, which leads us to juxtapositions, why we're actually here. This is another endeavor, and what I came up with as part of my guest professorship here at the University of Arts. And as I briefly said in the beginning, it's really intended for all students of the university, but really actually everyone. Everyone who's interested in learning from inspiring people about their work at the intersection of many different disciplines. It specifically looks at how the accelerated proliferation of technologies, digital technologies, in nearly all areas of life brings forth changes in art and cultural production and the future of work as a whole. So I will kind of quickly run through the program with you guys so you know what to expect over the course of the semester. I'm super thrilled, I have to say, about the lineup. It's an amazing lineup of speakers that we have. Next week, on Monday, same place here, 6 o'clock, we start with Oana Stănescu. She is a Romanian architect and designer who's building, writing, and teaching. Recently moved to Berlin from New York, and her work is, as she calls it, an undisciplined collection of projects across various sizes, programs, and collaborators. She is teaching at Harvard GSD and MIT in Cambridge, and she has worked closely over the years with the likes of Kanye West and Virgil Abloh. So that's next Monday. The week after, we have the Omsk Social Club here, represented by Penny. Their work is created between two worlds, namely one life as we know it, and the other is actually real game role-playing. Yeah? And they have exhibited across Europe, various institutions, galleries, off spaces, biennales, festivals. But they also served as co-curators of the 7th Athens Biennial this year, together with Larry Osai Mensah. So that's the 8th of November. And directly followed by Matilda Krzyzowski. She's a curator based here in Berlin. She plans, designs, writes, and talks about physical and digital space. Currently, she is the space and web curator of Civic, which is a newly established exhibition and discourse platform at the Academy of Art and Design in Basel. And she's also co-curator of institution building at SIVA in Brussels and many, many more things. Followed by Sol Calero is an artist from Venezuela, based here in Berlin. She works in a very wide range of media, and she is interested in reflecting on the ambiguity of cultural science, let's say, and how meanings can proliferate and change, and how this can affect themes also of gender and identity. And then we come to, these are all, by the way, live in here. And then Sharona is now the first as a remote lecturer. She is in Canada. Sharona Franklin is a Canadian multidisciplinary disabled artist, writer, designer, consultant, and advocate. And her work explores, as she calls it, radical therapies and cybernetic craft, bioritualism, ecology, pharmacology, and social interdependence. And Franklin's practice coalesces discourses of disability, gender, class, and bio-citizenship. I've come to know Sharona actually via Matilda, who I had just introduced before. And then we have another architect on board, Samir Bantal. He's an architect, a curator, a researcher, but he's also the director of AMO. So AMO is the think tank founded by Rem Koolhaas, world famous architect, which enables his architecture practice, OMA, to apply its architectural thinking beyond architecture to the fields of design, technology, media, and art. So Samir is, amongst many, many other things, responsible for the Countryside exhibition last year at the Guggenheim, also for the Figures of Speech exhibition for Virgil Abloh at the MCA in Chicago, and for many of his recent off-white spaces in Miami and Paris. And on the 13th of December, we have Tabitha Rezer from French Guiana joining us remotely. Tabitha is an artist, a devotee, a yogi, a dwala, and also soon to be a farmer based in French Guiana that finds her expression in a very, let's say, cross-dimensional practice. And she envisions a network science that consists of organic, electronic, and spiritual networks as healing technologies. So she embraces digital and corporal and ancestral memory to dig into scientific imaginaries and mystical realms to tackle actually colonial wounds and energetic misalignments, as she calls it. And then we have Isaac Kariuki from Kenya. He's a visual artist whose work centers on surveillance, borders, and the black market. So his form also takes form of image, video, and performance, and he's the founder of the Diaspora Drama, which is a 3-part publication about fringe internet culture in Africa and beyond. Coming in the new year to the Uber curator, Hans-Ulrich Obrist. He's joining us very likely remotely. Well, basically needs no further introduction. He's the artistic director of the Serpentine Galleries in London, senior advisor at Luma and Arles, and senior artistic advisor at the Shed in New York. Since his, I think, first show called The Kitchen Show or The World Soup in 1991, I think he has curated over 350 exhibitions and published incredibly many books as well. So again, from Isaac, who's a very young artist in Kenya, to Hans Ulrich, the big names and the new names that I'm trying to always mix, because that's really where it gets the most exciting. And then where I'm extremely thrilled, because I'm a huge fan, Candice Williams will be joining us remotely as well from the USA. She's a visual artist, and her practice spans collage, performance, writing, publishing, and curating. If you saw the exhibitions at the Berghain, she had a piece there, a beautiful video piece, and if you saw the recent exhibition at the Stoschek collection, Fire in My Belly, there were also a bunch of her works in there. Very, very powerful artist, and she explores and deconstructs critical theory and around race, nationalism, authority, and also eroticism. And she's also the founder and editor-at-large of Cassandra Press, which is an artist-run publishing and educational platform. And now another big, this is like a fanboy moment, Nicolas Bourriaud. I mentioned him a couple of times before, French art critic. He's known for, many things, but 2 books. One is Relational Aesthetics, the other one is Post-Production, had a huge influence on many artists, definitely on me. He was also the co-founder and co-director of the Palais du Tokyo in Paris. He was a curator at the Tate. He was the former director of the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris, and many, many more things. And a huge, he questions ideas of originality profoundly in his work. And which brings us to Susan Kennedy. She's a theater director actually here in Berlin, works a lot at the Volksbühne and at the Münchner Kammerspiele. She created like 2 pieces that are maybe known, theater pieces called Ultra World and Coming Society, together with the visual artist Markus Selk. And in her plays, they're often like huge masked, quite distorted playback dialogues, doppelgangers, multimedia, and the actors always somewhat confront the audience with questions like of what does it mean to be human today in this kind of world full of media and technology. She's going to be live here with us again. Then all the way to Korea, Jiwon Song. She is an artist, graphic designer, and a web developer, but web developer next level I'm speaking here of. She designs and develops very experimental websites, interactive graphics driven by content structure instead of like static templates in web design conventions. So I'm also thrilled. And the last talk is going to be, actually I realized I spelled something wrong. It's the 7th of February and not January. And there's a little time loop here, and it's obviously the 14th of February, is Katja Novitskova. She's an Estonian installation artist that interrogates the position and locations where the technological and the physical coincide, understanding them as two facets of the kind of same ideological continuum. So this is going to be what you can expect here, exactly where I'm standing, each Monday at 6 o'clock throughout the entire semester. This is one of the Ringvorlesungen of the Studium Generale. That's one of two kind of projects that I'm piloting here. Some of you I already have met, and I know that you signed up for the Post-Protocol Master Colloquium. Some of you are new to this. A few words about this too. Well, we can really say it's an attempt. It's an experiment. It's a test balloon that we're trying this semester here with Post-Protocol. It's a colloquium that offers a space for advanced students for reflection and debate, for experimentation in a cooperative kind of co-learning environment. It's really, firstly and foremost, a place to come together, to share your ideas, your processes, your experiences, and your knowledge, and learn from one another in this kind of peer-to-peer co-learning environment of also constructive criticism to really kind of push your projects ahead. And as I mentioned earlier, I really thereby act as a coach rather than a teacher in a classical sense. This will be happening on Fridays, bi-weekly in the afternoon. So far, a lot of people have signed up for this already, so I might split the groups in two, and actually it will happen then weekly, and we can see what works best for you guys. But I think the idea behind it for me is what I said earlier, that I think it's super important at the master level to really prepare the graduates of an art school to be ready for what's coming afterwards. Not only to become, the best that you can be at what you do, but also get ready for the world out there. And that really is one of collaboration, one of where you need to work with others, where you need to sit around the table and kind of find solutions together. And that's also something that I'm aiming with this master colloquium. And in a way, it's also one for all the, let's say, disciplinary oddballs that don't really fit in or that kind of come, hit the boundaries in their own discipline. Think of like Breakfast Club meets Police Academy, but it's actually, I think that's not your generation anymore, the reference. But like it's going to be driven by this notion of what's called freischwebende Intelligenz or free-floating intelligence, meaning that it's independent and detached from any kind of form of normative thinking. So more unbound, critical, sensitive, and pluralistic. And when I say intelligence, I actually recently listened to a podcast, and I just now learned that intelligence literally means reading between the lines. So interlegere, that means in between, and legere is reading. So intelligence actually means reading between the lines. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do there. And this brings us then to this kind of realization that really creativity at the end of the day is intelligence having fun. We came to the end, slide 53 it is. 60 minutes later, summa summarum, my philosophy and what I'm offering you here at the University of Art is about challenging fixed binaries that stabilize meaning and representation and like to keep meaning rather open-ended and in a perpetual state of becoming. So this is really an invitation to all of you here, the few of you that are live, and the, I don't know how many that are online with us tonight. From next week on, you can sign up, and it's going to follow a first come, first served principle of who's in the room. So I invite you all to find ambiguities, to find contradictions and disruptions in kind of accepted ideas, and welcome actually these semiotic collisions. So thank you very much for your attention. Okay, I got one more for the road.
So no one is original. No art is original. We are all being influenced by everything and everyone. The corny motherfucker is the one who doesn't say,